Was Yu-Gi-Oh's biggest Tier 0 deck more dominant than Magic's strongest meta tyrant? How do Pokemon's strongest decks fit into that equation? These are questions that I attempted to answer a couple of months ago. However, by popular request, we will be taking a look at some more ferocious decks from these card games. I'll leave a link to the previous video here, but it's by no means required viewing to enjoy this one. I'm Simon from Games Deconstructed, and let's get started. Summer 2019 heralds the release of a completely new MTG product, the first edition of the Modern Horizons set. The set was much discussed at the time, mainly due to its high power level, with multiple cards finding home in existing modern decks and in some cases having brand new strategies created around them. The card that we'll be talking about that gave the name to the period known hence as GAC Summer is Hogaak Arisen Necropolis. Two somewhat distinct yet somewhat overlapping strategies were built around the card, one featuring Bridge from Below and Vengevine, and another using a shell centered around the mechanic Dredge. Both relied on interacting with the graveyard through self-mill, discard, sacrificing creatures, or a mix of all three, with the intended payoff being the ability to play Hogaak reliably as early as turn 2, putting an 8/8 Trampler into the game very early, which in turn put a merciless clock on the game, especially coupled with the other free creatures that could join GAC on the field, like Bloodghasts or Vengevines. That was not the end of the deck's array of tricks though. It could utilize a combination of Bridge from Below, ideally multiple of them, and Altar of Dementia to create an overwhelming number of zombie tokens, which it would then suck to Altar to mill their opponent to death in a combo kill. This made the deck quite resilient to graveyard hate as well, traditionally an effective balancing lever for graveyard-centric metagames. Should one piece of the deck's strategy, like the Hogaak, be removed by something like Surgical Extraction, the deck could still outrace the opposition via its aggressive game plan or assemble the combo for the win. First appearing during the Team Modern Open in Pittsburgh, where it took 19 out of the top 32 placements, the deck's iterations soon became the strategy to beat at modern tournaments. On July 8th, to preemptively combat the deck's rising tide of dominance, an emergency ban hit Bridge from Below. The centerpiece of the deck's combo plan and a contributor to its aggressive one as well, this was intended to slow the deck down, but it very much didn't stop it. So let's look at how the deck did in tournaments during that era, and to shed some light on the method that I'll be using here, I'm gonna be looking at what percentage of the top cuts of tournaments that have deck lists available in the period were occupied by the deck. This will allow us to compare the strength of the deck against others of its time, and also compare easily across games. If a deck has a higher top 4, top 8, or top 16 representation than some of the others, I'm gonna accept that as evidence of it being more dominant within its format. So out of the 241 tournaments played during its time, it made up 12.65% of all top 4s, 12.88% of top 8s, and 13.21% of top 16s. Feels like it should be higher based on recent memory, but maybe I'll ascribe that to the emotional damage caused by it fully dominating some of the early events. And we have to take into account that there were a lot of modern events played during that period, so it's easy to find a couple high-profile ones where it dominated and present that as a sample of something being wrong with the format. I'd also speculate that this number might have been even higher, but a non-trivial number of players were cagey about buying into the strategy, expecting it to be hit with a ban soon. And that ban did come. In the August 2019 banned and restricted announcements, Hogaak was banned for good, along with Fateless Looting, bringing an end to him and his summer. As it's the first deck we are discussing, it will naturally go to the top of my little unofficial power ranking here, but I suspect it won't stay there for long. Moving to a Pokemon deck, we will be content to stay in 2019. The release of Cosmic Eclipse on November 1st that year marks the arrival of Arceus, Dialga, and Palkia, or ADP for short. The most immediately striking detail about the card is that they've somehow stuffed 3 Pokemon onto one piece of cardboard. This was indeed the gimmick of the era, so-called tag team Pokemon were team-ups of multiple mons in the form of a single card. They functioned in a way similar to the GX or EX cards, more popular nowadays, being a single basic Pokemon, meaning you can play it straight up without need for evolution, but one that's overwhelmingly powerful for a basic, both bulky and with strong attacks and abilities. This is balanced out, or at least attempted to, by it netting your opponent multiple prizes should it be knocked out. Now, the number one most important piece of text on this card is its GX ability Altered Creation. It doesn't do damage, so it effectively amounts to a setup turn, but in exchange, all your future attacks of all your Pokemon deal a bit more damage, and crucially, give you an extra prize, should they knock out your opponent's Pokemon. ADP was the subject of some debate at the time and saw fringe use, but for it to turn into the powerhouse that we will be discussing, we have to wait until February 2020. The release of Sword and Shield. Two things happened at that time. The first was the addition of the Pokemonization, who would contribute the remaining fourth of the deck's name, the Z in ZADP. It gave the deck a marvelously strong attacker that was easy to set up. The deck's strategy was to bring it into the active for the coup de grace after ADP outlived its usefulness and mop up whatever was left of your opponent at that point. The second and arguably even more important bit that's a bit less obvious from just looking at the deck list was a rules change that dropped alongside the new set. Players were no longer allowed to play supporters on the first turn of the game. This limited the amount of card draw and filtering players could do to set up. As such, the same players went looking for other means to the same ends, and those happened to be support Pokemon. Pokemon like the Den GX or Crobat V that could offer these draw options, these being worth 2 prizes by default, coupled with the extra prize from Altered Creation, made it so the ZADP player only needed to knock out 2 of those in order to win the game. And they generally folded to a single hit from the deck's attackers. Decks running these backline liabilities were the perfect prey for the predator ZADP was about to become. Looking at the data for ZADP, I'm inclined to view it as kind of 2 periods. First, we have its golden age, from February 2020 to December of the same year, where it was inarguably one of the strongest options, leading to certain tournament top cuts looking like this. However, even during that period, it could occasionally lose top tournament spots to other strong decks like Pikachu and Zekrom or Eternatus VMAX. So to look at the stats for that period, in its golden era, the deck took up 26% top 4s, 30% top 8s, and 25.89% top 16s for the tournaments that we have this data for. Also counting kind of the dusk of its popularity between January 2021 and maybe April to May 2021, it was still quite playable in that period, but we see the overall numbers drop to 25% top 4s, 28% top 8s, and 24.74% top 16s. Those are quite similar, both of these groups of numbers, so we can probably memorize both as being in the 25 to 30-ish% range. Being on the market for much longer and having a higher tournament top cut representation than GAC puts this one straight to the top of my power ranking. This one is an interesting case of an existing rogue archetype brought to the heights of power by the addition of arguably just a single additional support card. The second half of 2017 finds Spiral on the lower power level side of things, but not without promise or popularity. It's somewhat notable for its theme, a play on super spy media, especially borrowing from James Bond movies as inspiration, and these are translated quite well into what's on the cards and the gameplay of the deck. The 2 main bits that will be relevant here, as they will remain parts of the strategy after it skyrockets in popularity, are as follows. First, the archetype is hyper-reliant on having this James Bond XP in play. Spiral Super Agent. Spirals have a veritable toolbox of powerful support pieces for him, but you need him in play to make best use of them, or in many cases to use them period. Occasionally, you'll find some of the other Spiral monsters capable of convincingly impersonating the guy, giving the deck some more consistency. The second is the Spiral top deck gimmick. Certain cards in the archetype, Super Agent included, have you play a minigame of guessing what card type, monster, spell or trap, is on top of your opponent's deck. If you guess correctly, you get a reward, like being able to special summon Super Agent for free. And of course, you also get information on what they will draw next turn and all that good stuff. The archetype also comes with ways to stack the top of the deck for guaranteed hits, but occasionally you will have to go in blind. Now, the release of Circuit Break in October 2017 sees an additional card added to the archetype, Spiral Double Helix. This being an extra deck monster with an easy summoning condition that serves as both a combo extender and a super agent stand-in, brings the deck over the top in terms of both explosive combo potential and consistency. And this was made apparent during the first event after the dust had settled on the Double Helix bearing expansion, that being YCS Dallas on October 21st, 2017. Where a whopping 29 out of the top 32 competitors showed up with fresh Spiral brews in their deck boxes. We will be counting both the OCG and the TCG as part of our stats here. There's a lot more tournament data available for the OCG, even though a lot of it requires translating Internet Archive backups from Japanese. So this is based on 52 tournaments from the period that I was able to find decklists for, and during its combined reigns in TCG and OCG combined, the deck occupied 69.78% top 4s, 68.98% top 8s, and 67.88% top 16s, cementing its place as one of the unquestioned Tier 0 strategies in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. I'd argue that top 4 data is the most reliable here, since a lot of the smaller OCG tournaments only report top 4s, so going beyond that is kind of hazy. However, Spiral's reign came to an end with the February 2018 ban list. The most important inclusions on that being Spiral Resort, limited to 1, and Blackwing Gofu banned. A similarly harsh ban list dropped in the OCG a month earlier, hitting Spiral Quick Fix, Gear Drone, and Resort. Afterwards, variants where the Spirals were used as an engine in conjunction with another archetype, like Sky Strikers, were tested briefly, but without the same level of success. So this is an immediate first in our power ranking, and by a mile. Not much else to say about it. Now, this is going to be the oldest deck on the list. It's well before my time, and I am getting on in years. February 2004 sees the release of Darksteel, the second set of the Mirrodin block. It was the source of some cards that still pop up in Magic decks today, over 20 years later, like Skullclump or Ether Vial. And its release heralded the arrival of a new top dog deck, Affinity. An artifact-centric beatdown strategy, in line with the artifact focus of the Mirrodin block, it was a force to be reckoned with, in both Standard and Block Constructed, since the latter was still a competitive format during that time. The deck takes its name from the namesake mechanic, Affinity, which appears on a number of cards in it like Mirror Enforcer or Frogmite, and discounts them based on the number of artifacts you have in play already. Now, being able to cast these for free with enough artifacts on the field, especially with the deck running a number of 0-mana artifacts just for the discount, that would have been decent already. But Mirrodin and Darksteel also featured a series of artifact lands. And these accelerated the rate at which you could be pumping out free Mirror Enforcers considerably. The addition of Arcbound Ravager and Disciple of the Vault turned all these artifacts into damage, while Skullclump turned every sacrifice creatures into additional cards, many of them probably free due to them having Affinity. And you can see in what direction that's going. At Pro Tour Kobe 2004, where the deck was block constructed playable, it saw the following results. About a month later, the deck transitioned into Standard, where it was met by a quick ban to the absolutely busted Skullclump. But the deck took that in its stride, generally by adding Cranial Plating and Blinkmoth Nexus into the mix, leading to a good showing at the 2004 World Championships. Overall, across 14 tournaments in the period, the deck put up a performance resulting in a representation of 35.71% top 4s, 33.33% top 8s, with not really enough stats surviving to really gauge a top 16. All this over a period of nearly 13 months, from February 2004 to about March 2005. March was the end of the deck in Standard, as it was met with a severe ban list, preventing the deck from running Arcbound, Disciple, or any of the artifact lands. This is over a third of the cards in the deck, and I don't think I've seen a targeted ban list of this scope since. With stats in the 30s, high 30s for top 4 percentage, I think this is the second strongest deck we've seen so far. Nowhere close to the absurdity that was Spiral, but a solid second nonetheless. A much more modern deck with an impressive runtime, this is Lugia V-Star, or Lugia Archeops. A 2022-2023 powerhouse, still playable all the way into early 2025, this deck is predictably built around its namesake Pokémon. Lugia V-Star is a reasonably strong attacker on its own, but its more interesting use is as a setup piece using its V-Star ability, Summoning Star. Except when I play the deck, I insist on calling it Simoning Star. Whatever it's called, it allows you to place 2 normal-type Pokémon from your discard onto your bench, disregarding any evolution requirements in the process. The intended target for these are 2 Archeopses, Archeopsi? Also support Pokémon capable of incredible energy acceleration using their ability Primal Turbo. Normally, this powerful ability would be gated by Archeops being a Stage 2 evolution, but Lugia grants you access to these for free, provided you're able to stuff them into your discard pile beforehand. The energies that these Archeopses pull from the deck are used to fuel whatever energy-hungry basic attacker du jour you put in the deck. During the deck's prime, Radiant Charizard and Yveltal were popular choices. I've personally played modern iterations of the deck a bunch and quite enjoy the playstyle. The deck first appeared on the scene after Lugia released on November 11th, 2022, immediately showing up in force at the LAIC Sao Paulo 2 weeks later, where Tordeklev took first place with the deck. It would continue to be the inarguable top deck in the meta until the April 2023 rotation, where the deck still retained the Lugia Archeops engine, but lost some other cards like Aurora and Powerful Energy. This required it to switch up its suite of attackers and lose some of its popularity as a result. During that quite long period, the deck made up 34.52% tournament top 4s, 38.69% top 8s, and 39.10% top 16s. It was definitely capable of cracked performance, like in the Arlington Regional, where it took 5 of the top 6 places, or the Orlando Regional, where it took 6 out of the top 8. However, it also had tournaments like this. This is the San Diego Regional, played just a month before the Orlando one. An interesting case this, since we can see that it was overwhelmingly popular at a number of tournaments. We can go beyond the top cuts even, since Pokémon has great archival data. We have decklists for as many as, over 100 of competitors for some of these tournaments, and we can see that Lugia's play rate overall was quite high. 36.94% of the decks that we know of, 515 out of the nearly 1400 lists in my sample. Now interestingly, we see its representation actually rise a bit as we get closer to the top 16. So it was performing to a level beyond its popularity. But this drops back down the closer we get to the podium, so that means that other decks in the meta still had a shot at getting tournament wins. So based on the stats and the reasonably high longevity of the deck, I'd say that it's super close with Affinity. On the merit of Lugia showing these stats across more tournaments, 21 to Affinity's 14, and with the additional top 16 representation data being available for it, I think I'll place it just ever so slightly above Affinity, so in second place. So for a change, let's pick a deck that was nipped in the bud quite quickly, but for good reason. This is Performapal Performage, or Pepe, as it was known in the community. Two things happened with the release of Breakers of Shadow, a set where a major element was the promotion of the Pendulum summoning mechanic. Firstly, the release coincided with bannings and limitations placed on several of the currently powerful meta threats, Necros, Cliffords, and El Shaddol for the most part. The second thing that happened is the arrival of cards like Monkey Board here, widely believed to be among the most absurdly powerful cards in the deck. This led to the creation of a powerful, pendulum-centric deck that was Pepe. As many powerful Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks do, this one is able to cycle through the deck with multiple effects that happen not to be once per turn, like Plush Fire, Lizard Draw, or Monkey Board, committing the delicious sin of getting card advantage in Yu-Gi-Oh! The deck was also a bit of a toolbox, using a mix of strong cards from multiple archetypes enabled by the Pepe engine to have multiple ways of disrupting the opponent as early as turn 1, while being able to play through interruptions themselves with high versatility and consistency and OTK potential. Showing up in impressive numbers at the YCS Sydney 2016, the deck took 28 spots in the top 32. Including the winning spot. However, within 2 weeks of the deck seeing legal play for the first time in the TCG, 3 pieces were emergency banned, and this is a rather rare occurrence in Yu-Gi-Oh! Without Monkey Board, Plush Fire, and Damage Juggler, the deck went through a series of adjustments, like the inclusion of more Draco Slayer archetype cards, but by that point it was no longer the same deck, nor was it as dominant. So while this one was playable for just a very short while in the TCG, community consensus is that it was overwhelmingly dominant during that time, presenting an interesting comparison to some of the other decks we've already discussed. Since its playtime in the TCG was extremely limited, I turned to OCG tournaments to find more data. Unfortunately, while there is lots of info on the play rate of the deck, and it constituted 46% of the decks played at 106 OCG tournaments between August and December 2015, there's very little info on placements. So the stats I'm using here are based on just 18 tournaments that I was able to find decklist data for. So between July 2015 and February 2016, the totality of its OCG and TCG reign summed up, it occupied 48.45% top 4s, 46.62% top 8s, not enough data to say much about top 16s, I'm afraid. This puts it squarely in second place of my power ranking, just behind Spiral, confirming the expected truth that when it comes to cracked decks, there's just no beating Yu-Gi-Oh! A huge thanks go to the supporters over at patreon.com/gamesdeconstructed. If you would like to join them and support the channel, head to that link, patreon.com/gamesdeconstructed. And special thanks go to Patreon supporters Dillinger, Maciej Majka, and Anna Schulz. I've been Simon from Games Deconstructed, thanks a lot for watching, let me know what other powerful decks you would like to see covered, and I hope to see you in the next one.